Hi again, Shir. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. This is our third part of Israel's zombie economy. And we are together in Strasbourg and have already had the second part recorded. I am looking forward to this third part, largely because, frankly, I would like to learn from from your research and your knowledge on the topic of it's an interesting title of our topic today, which is Israel's breakdown into tribes, which speaks to the recent, 9, 10 years or so crisis in Israel regarding how one government after another we saw from 2015 until now falter or fall. We have seen repeated elections, and people always exaggerate what's going on to the point where a lot of people talk about collapse, which is actually a topic of the next topic, next part. But what is the cause of this crisis, generally speaking? How should we see it without dramatizing it to the point where it no longer comports with reality?
Okay. I think that it is a dramatic process. So it might sound very dramatic what I say, but I do think that it's not something that started in 2015. In 2015, there was a moment in which really the political system became affected by an ongoing crisis, which is the crisis of apartheid. Israel is an apartheid state. And as an apartheid state, it is not just a binary system of oppression and control, like you have the Jews and you have the Palestinians. It's much more complex. The apartheid system breaks down society into a complex hierarchy, which was also the case in South Africa. There were a lot of different levels in the system, in the hierarchy system of apartheid. And the first thing that we need to understand about an apartheid system is that no one has rights. And I used to say many times when people were asking me, is Israel a democracy? Can you say whatever you want? And so on. And when I still lived in Jerusalem, I would say, as a Jew, I have freedom of speech. I have the right to say whatever I want, but Palestinians don't have it. But I was wrong, because it's not that I had the right of free speech, I had the privilege of free speech. And a system of apartheid is a system of privileges. And when you have, and when people understand it in a very visceral way, that they don't have rights that they can count on, but they only have privileges that they can lose as easily as they can gain them, they fight for these privileges, they fight for their identity as if it is the basis of their existence. So, all over the world, we are living in a time of identity politics. We are experiencing white supremacy in the United States and in Europe, and this is not new. But in the United States, even today, if you oppose white supremacy, it doesn't mean that your citizenship will be revoked. But in Israel, if you oppose Jewish supremacy, then people will tell you, are you not worried that you will lose your residency? This is the difference. And because the apartheid system breaks down the society into many groups, and you have Palestinians from Gaza to the West Bank, to East Jerusalem, and you have the Bedouins, and you have the Druze, and you have Palestinians with Israeli citizenship, and even them, they have different levels of privilege if they are Muslim or if they're Christian. And then you have among the Jewish population the ultra-orthodox and the national Orthodox, and you have the Mizrahi Jews, and you have the Ashkenazi Jews. In 2015, the Israeli government was a government that was based on a lie. It was based on the idea that the liberal so-called center of Ashkenazi, well-educated, secular Jews joined Netanyahu's right-wing government in order to force this government to promote the recruitment of the ultra-Orthodox into the military. This was the idea. And the ultra-Orthodox, for 1 second, panicked. They, for 1 second, believed Netanyahu's lies. Netanyahu never says the truth. And he said we're going to have to recruit the ultra-orthodox into the military, to draft them. Of course, he didn't mean it, but for one moment they thought maybe he means it, and they took down the government. And they had massive demonstrations. And in one very important interview, one of the leaders of the ultra-Orthodox community said, maybe we made a mistake that we had this alliance with the Zionists. Maybe we should build our alliance with the Palestinians. And after this interview, Netanyahu made sure that the ultra-Orthodox would be part of every successive government that he established. And they became completely committed to him. But this created a situation in which the political system is not divided into two parts, like the Jewish supremacy part against, let's say, the democratic part that wants to also recognize the Palestinians as human beings. No, it's actually different camps. And the camp of the Zionist opposition, those liberal middle-class Ashkenazi Jews who want to draft the ultra-Orthodox, they oppose not only the Palestinians and the right of Palestinians to exist as free citizens of the state, but they also oppose the ultra-Orthodox. And this creates a situation in which you have actually three different possible coalitions to rule the country, but none of them has a majority. And every government eventually falls.
Wow, that's quite a bit, and I actually feel that it opens the door to a lot of other questions, starting with the question of the current, right-wing government that everyone talks about. That this is the most right-wing government in the history of Israel, and of course, this started in 2022 when this government was sworn in. Actually, it was in 2023 in January. But this idea, in quotation marks, the most right-wing government in Israel's history, was said on each opportunity or occasion where Netanyahu's government or Netanyahu's reign appeared since 2009. What makes this particular government unique? I'm leading you here, and is this the end of the political crisis, or is this the beginning of something much worse and deeper potentially?
It's true that every government that Netanyahu has established from 2009 has always been the most right-wing government in the history of Israel, and each one taking it more and more to the right. But this particular government that we have now is actually is a government that crossed the red line. And it's a red line that is maybe for an outsider doesn't seem so significant, but it is a red line for the Zionist movement. And because of this, it is very significant for the internal Israeli political system, because the Zionist movement always said we need to have a debate between different Zionist parties so that the non-Zionists will not have a foothold in the political system. But it's not a one-party system where you only have the Zionist party. You have different Zionist parties with different interpretations. And they have to have a space in which all of these parties can coexist and agree that there are certain things that are very important not to cross. And it was actually the Likud government, the right-wing government, led by Menachem Begin and then Yitzhak Shamir in the 80s, that decided that the Kahanists, so these very extreme, messianic, national Orthodox, right-wing Jews who wanted to expel or even kill all the Palestinians, led by the Rabbi Meir Kahana, but his supporters as well, they said this is a red line. We have to outlaw this party and this movement and keep them out of the Israeli parliament because they will undermine the future of the state. Netanyahu in 2022 it decided to bring them back into the consensus, bring them back into the camp of the right wing. And he called on the different small, very extremist, very violent groups and parties to unite and to form an electoral bloc that was able to become very significant. It has 14 seats out of 120 in the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. And it was actually during the time of the so-called government of change or coalition of change, which was the only break in the continuous rule of Netanyahu between 2015 and 2000 and now. There was only a break actually with a short-lived government between 2021 and 2022, which was a coalition of 8 different political parties. This is unprecedented. 8 political parties with wildly different views. There is the Islamic Party and the far-right party of Lieberman, which is a secular party, and you also have national Orthodox leading this government. And this coalition, you could basically summarize it as the anti-Netanyahu coalition. 8 parties that said we're willing to compromise everything, just that Netanyahu will not be the prime minister. And because of this, they were able to achieve nothing. Netanyahu was very clever. He decided to challenge this coalition by saying, let's bring up for a vote the special apartheid law that prevents Palestinians from reuniting with their families just because they're Palestinians. Jews can reunite with their families and invite family members who are not citizens of the state to come and receive automatic residency in Israel and very quickly also citizenship. But if you're not Jewish, you don't have that privilege. And this is a clear apartheid law, which is absolutely illegal and which is the reason that international organizations have accused Israel of apartheid. One of the reasons. Netanyahu said, you know what? What if the Likud party, the right wing, will vote against it? We will accept that Palestinians will have rights. And the government had no choice but to vote in favor of an apartheid law and get even the Palestinians within the government or within the coalition to vote in favor of it. It broke apart the whole lie that you can have any kind of majority rule in this system with all the internal contradictions. It exposed that Israel is broken down into tribes. This is the point. And then Netanyahu said, we're going to have an election, and this time no more compromises. And this is the point. This is going to be the populist government, a government which will have the inner dark wishes of Jews who want to be lords of the land. And if you want to kill all the Palestinians, we're not going to disqualify you. And if you want to annex occupied territory, we're not going to disqualify you. This is why this government is so dangerous, because it did achieve a majority and it created this momentum and put people in very key positions of power who are from the very fringes of Israeli society. So it's a red line for the Zionist movement. The Zionist police is the one that said that Ben Gvir is a terrorist because he supported the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, because he accumulated illegal weapons in order to use them to build militias in the West Bank. So they said he's a terrorist. Now he's the head of the police. Bezalel Smotrich, who was gathering petrol in his apartment to set people on fire. This was the time that Jewish terrorist burnt alive Mohammed Abu Khdeir in 2014. And Smotrich was discovered that he was hoarding petrol in his apartment. And he's now the Minister of Finance, as well as the governor of the West Bank. These are things that are a red line for the Zionist movement. So this new government that is now in power in Israel is something that has never been seen before. And when people in Israel, especially the establishment, what Trump likes to call the deep state, right? The heads of the judicial system, the chief judges, the heads of the liberal media, and the heads of the secret services. were saying Netanyahu is taking the country into a very dangerous direction. This could be the state to a very dangerous direction. This could undermine the existence of the state of Israel, what Netanyahu is doing. His response was, these people are bitter and don't understand what it means to be happy. His promise to his voters is, I will make you happy. And there's no arguing with this point.
Shir, I am always interested, I've always been interested since the 90s in this idea of liberal Zionism, which is presented as an alternative to, I don't know, mainstream Zionism or hardline Zionism or what have you, especially in the United States, where people speak about atrocities, about discrimination, about military occupation, about illegal settlements, about ethnic cleansing and what have you, as something that is not part of what liberal Zionism is. It's part of what the other Zionists are doing. And, try to cross hairs here, or they try to cross hairs and so on and so forth. But today, we find something else, especially in terms of polls, consistent polls from Israel, by Israelis, by Zionists, and so on, that do not show this fantastic distance at all. In fact, there's a lot of consensus on what is going on. And when I say consensus, I don't mean 50, 60%. We're talking 75, 85, and sometimes more, depending on the issue. Now, what is the position of liberal Zionism or liberal Zionists or the left, liberal left in Israel today? People like Yair Golan, who's head of Meretz, the liberal Zionist party. How do they see what's happening today, and how can we see this supposed distinction?
So your question actually has two parts.
Yeah.
One part is, what is the position of liberal Zionism? And the second one is, what is the position of liberal Zionists? And I don't want to answer the first question, because I'm not interested in the ideology of Zionism and the different texts or interpretations. I think that's a distraction. Let's talk about the people. Let's answer this question anthropologically. What do liberal Zionists as a group of people think, and what do they say? I don't care about what kind of ideology they have. I think that here we are looking at...
Let me just interrupt you 1 second. I see what you're saying, and I appreciate that. But that's what I'm actually referring to. This is actually the issue that you could describe Zionism in however which way you want, but on the ground is what I'm referring to. The people that actually call themselves liberal Zionists.
Yeah.
So your caveat is actually what I'm trying to get at.
Right. Because I don't, for example, among the ultra-orthodox, maybe we can talk a little bit about them as well. There are many who call themselves anti-Zionists, and at the same time, they are confiscating Palestinian land and participating in the apartheid system, and for them, there's no contradiction. So it's not like evil. If you're evil, you're a Zionist. It's something else.
And if you're not Zionist, you're like totally fine.
Yeah, no, it's not the case. No, but this group of people who call themselves liberal Zionists are a group of people who used to rule this country, who used to rule Israel. And they have a lot of power. They are the heads of the universities. They are the heads of the newspapers. And they have a lot of money. And so I think it does matter what they say and what they think, because the fact that they are in a deep delusional state shows how deep the crisis has become. These are the people who have the ability to analyze the facts, the figures, the statistics more than anyone else. I'm talking about, the leaders of the managers, the chief researchers at the Central Bureau of Statistics, and the heads of the Department of Political Science in every university. These are people who are now sometimes giving interviews to the press, and they're saying, what if there will be an election and a ceasefire? And then there will be a new government without Netanyahu. And somehow the liberal Zionists will be back in power and will have an investigation of the corruption and the crimes of the former government, and the economy will prosper again, and the world will forgive everything we've done in Gaza, and the genocide will be forgotten. They don't call it a genocide, so they don't really want to talk about what has happened in Gaza until now in the last 2 years. So they have this idea that everything can be made fine again just by getting rid of one person, of Netanyahu. And you hear this even from people like Yair Golan. Yair Golan has been elected to lead the liberal Zionist camp in Israel not because he's smart, not because he's particularly charismatic, but because he's a killer, because he's a fighter, because he was the deputy commander of the Israeli military. And when he was the deputy commander of the Israeli military, he was also, before he was the deputy commander, he was the military commander of the occupied territory of the West Bank. And I met him when he was the occupied commander, the commander of the occupied West Bank. And he gave a lecture to a bunch of liberal Zionists. And they asked him, why are you doing these things? And he said, well, we don't care about the Palestinians as human beings. We'd rather that the Palestinian Authority will deal with all the humanitarian stuff. We just care about security. And so this is not a consideration for us, whether Palestinians have access to basic human needs. The military is not responsible for these things, which is actually wrong. Then he continued to say in this lecture that the separation wall, the illegal separation wall in the West Bank, is something that the military opposed. And he personally told the Minister of Defense, this is not an effective way to create security. But the Minister of Defense told him, but security is not the first priority here. The main goal of the wall is to separate between people so that Palestinians and Jews will not become friends, will not marry each other, will not. So this is the main reason. And he was willing to say this. And when he said this, I realized that this is a man who is not able to keep his mouth shut. He's not, like, his job basically was to keep this piece of information secret. Later, he was also caught using Palestinians as human shields, as part of his role as a military commander. And then in 2016, he gave a very famous speech as the deputy commander of the Israeli military, and said that he is seeing trends in Israeli society that reminds him of the 30s and 40s in Europe. And then that was the end of his military career, basically. So there was no chance he will advance to become the head of the military, and he left the military and became a politician. So, and on October 7, when Israel was attacked, then he grabbed a gun and, just as an individual, drove down to the area of the kibbutzim around Gaza and started shooting Palestinian fighters and fighting on his own, like some kind of Rambo. That made him a kind of hero, and the left said, oh, he will be our leader. So this also tells you something about these liberal Zionists, about what qualities they're looking for in a leader. And ever since he was elected to lead this political camp, he was saying Israel should invade Lebanon. Israel should permanently occupy territory in Lebanon. Israel should intensify the war in Gaza. This is not a leftist position. But the idea is that by speaking like this, then maybe some people in Israel who are not part of this very homogeneous, small group of people, those liberal Zionists who are well-educated, Ashkenazi, middle class, so some people from the right will vote for him because he's a war hero, and because he's militaristic, and because he wants to kill Palestinians. And then when he comes into power, he will be able to get rid of Netanyahu and to investigate and to save Israel. All of this is completely fantasy. Why should the right wing vote for him if they have their own right wing leaders? Why? What kind of electoral base does the liberal Zionist group even have if so many of them have left the country? And somebody like Eyal Golan, who is not able to control what words come out of his mouth, and who is just his only qualification is killing people, is certainly not somebody who can think ahead politically and compete with Netanyahu. So I think this really shows how this camp in Israel has come to an end. And the reason that I think it's worthwhile that we're spending all this time to talk about this small group of people, which are really not controlling the state of Israel anymore and no longer have any influence to speak of. They used to, but not anymore, is because in the eyes of the New York Times and the Washington Post, and in the eyes of the European Union, these are the Israelis. And it's really about time that the West will divest itself from this fantasy. And this very small group of delusional Israelis are not leading Israel, and they don't represent Israel. Israel has become something completely different.
And even when they did, it's not, it's not a picnic.
No, when they were in power, they drove a very well planned, well organized, strategic plan of Jewish supremacy through apartheid, occupation, colonialism. They had organized they built the settlements. They in the occupied Palestinian territories. They established the military rule over Palestinians with Israeli citizenship. They created the apartheid laws in Israel, like the one I mentioned before about the family reunification. These are so they were very good at apartheid. So it wasn't picnic for anyone except for themselves.
I'm using that word in an interesting way. My interest in the question of liberal Zionists, or even liberal Zionism, if you will, I know you refuse to talk about this right now, but I understand why, is because earlier, like say in the 10 years ago, we encountered conversations, I was engaged in conversations with people that made a clear separation between Netanyahu and Israel, what Israel is and who's leading it. Recently, in the past few years, and certainly during the genocide, people in the United States, for instance, would talk about, would critique Israel by critiquing Netanyahu and what Netanyahu is doing as a form of protection for themselves. So they would say, like even now, even those who are outspoken regarding the genocide try to always go back to the idea that the Netanyahu government is doing this, as opposed to, this is a natural progression that we have witnessed, perhaps on speed of what has been happening, and of course at a much grander scale and much more intense scale. And this is precisely the issue. Now, even critics of Israel's behavior and atrocities and genocide try to highlight Netanyahu and his government and the right wing as though this is separate from this other fantasy that you referred to. So this is why I'm asking about this. And
but I don't agree with the argument of the natural progression either. Mm-hmm. I mean, if we say, yeah, of course, Netanyahu is not separate from Israeli society. There is a lot of racism in Israeli society, and the bloodlust and the desire to commit genocide is not something brought by Netanyahu. But it's also not something that is a natural progression. Because from the, let's call it, rational, strategic Zionism, mm-hmm. those very smart strategic people who created this apartheid system, does it necessarily have to break down into genocide, into this collapse, into this zombie situation that we see now? I don't think so. I think it's a choice. I think there was another choice.
So I see. So it's not predetermined as such, but of course, because of empirical developments, because of the let's be very straightforward. On October 7th, what happened was a pretext for the Israelis. It's not for at least the people who were in charge at the time, and we're not going to get into what happened precisely and whether there was any knowledge and so on and so forth regarding the response time and all of that. But what I'm speaking of is there has been what we can call, or what I call, so that I don't pin it on anybody else, is slow motion genocide for for many decades of a certain sort. And we are seeing now the sort of almost real time genocide aspect. So I guess by natural, I meant there is a kind of policy of dispossession and ethnic cleansing that is in play. And it will respond to empirical developments by exacerbating and exponentially increasing the pressure and the atrocities and the ethnic cleansing and what have you. I didn't mean it was like a predetermined thing, because otherwise this would have happened at any moment in the past, and it did not happen in the way it's happening.
It takes away the responsibility from the criminals. If
Absolutely.
you say it's predetermined, then it was.
So I appreciate I appreciate that intervention, but nonetheless, it is something that has been sped up and made far more intense. And it seems to a lot of people that there is a clear distinction between this government and what Israel is. And this is what is disputed, what I'm disputing, and I'm assuming that you are as well. And this is the main point that so many people in the United States today are waking up to, but they still, because of the repression that we are witnessing in the United States regarding any discourse on Israel, they still, or people like to still hide behind Netanyahu. Even a solid critic in the media who doesn't mince words, who hasn't minced words even before the genocide, somebody like John Oliver had an entire episode recently focusing on Netanyahu. And I'm not saying that this is wrong or anything of the sort, but it was actually a discursive move to focus on Netanyahu. And this is what I'm referring to. The issue is bigger, and I'm not sure if there's going to be any way to come back from this genocide, or to come back in general from this position, whether people pretend it's Netanyahu or otherwise. In other words, whether the culprit is Netanyahu or the culprit is something much more structural that is beyond Netanyahu. So I wanted to just affirm that. And I would like to hear your thoughts also, because we began to talk about it, on the role of the ultra-orthodox in all of this, and some of the contradictions that you probably would point out.
Yes, the ultra-orthodox are one of the tribes, a very important tribe, a very fast-growing tribe, but they were always very important. And they also made a choice. This was also not a natural progression or predetermined thing, but rather the choice of this group of people that theologically, in their interpretation of the Talmud, they are against the idea of Zionism and against the idea of a Jewish state before the coming of the Messiah. They even see the attempt to build a Jewish state before the coming of the Messiah as blasphemy, really blasphemy. Nevertheless, already from the time of Ben Gurion, many years before the establishment of the State of Israel, Ben Gurion said, we need to win these people to our camp and to get their Jewish identity to be more important to them than their religion. And we think of these people as very strongly religious because they dress in a certain way, but it doesn't reduce their identity to just one point. And there are many different factions within the ultra-Orthodox community, and I'm sure you know Neturei Karta, who are not just anti-Zionist but also pro-Palestinian, and there are anti-Zionist ultra-Orthodox who are very much anti-Palestinian and very racist, but still anti-Zionist. And there are some factions among the ultra-Orthodox who have this flirtation with Zionism and are willing to tolerate certain levels of Zionism. What I can say about all these groups is that military service is anathema to them. And even those who support the government, support Netanyahu, support the Jewish state, support the apartheid system, they say, we will support the state by praying for it, by strengthening it spiritually, but we will not carry weapons. And some of them even go as far as saying that it's better to die than to serve as soldiers. And there are many reasons for this. Let's not get into the whole internal debate within the ultra-Orthodox society. But
I'm keeping mental notes for every time you say let's not get into it, so that in the future. I'm going to ask you about all of these things.
Okay, we can have many more parts in the future. Yes, but I'm also not the maybe the right person to ask about this because I don't know this community from inside. But I do know how it is perceived from the so-called secular part of Israeli society, which is not really secular, but that's another philosophical discussion. But they do have such hatred and patronism towards the ultra Orthodox. They use terminology to describe the ultra Orthodox, which you and I probably agree, is completely anti Semitic, calling them parasites because they don't work and they only take money from the state. And this is not true, by the way. They do work and they don't get a lot of money from the state compared to other groups in Israel. For example, the arms industry, which is getting a lot more money from the state. But they feel attacked, they feel threatened, and they try to protect themselves in this context. And I think that they have made a strategic mistake believing that they should be on the side of power with the Zionist government in order to protect themselves from persecution, because eventually the government turns against them. And this is what we're seeing now. And this is part of the crisis that we mentioned in 2015 as Netanyahu's government fell. And then they flocked to Netanyahu's camp saying only he can protect us. And the opposition in Israel has become disempowered completely because they continue to use this anti-Semitic language. Those ultra-Orthodox are parasites and they have to serve in the military. This is not going to happen. The ultra-Orthodox are not going to be convinced to serve in the military. It just widens the gap between the tribes. And there are some parts of the ultra-Orthodox society that are falling off, let's call it this way, that are leaving the yeshivas, and some of them do join the military as individuals. Some of them renounce their faith and become secular, but these are small numbers. And overall speaking, this is continues to be a significant part of the Jewish population of Israel. And the two biggest illegal settlements in the West Bank are settlements which are ultra-Orthodox settlements. So these are people who are very much in the center of all of these issues. And you cannot have an evacuation of the settlements without evacuating hundreds of thousands of ultra-Orthodox. And they know it, and I think this is a very deep part of this crisis, and what we now also see in the Israeli military. This is maybe the last point to say, that you have soldiers who are called for reserve duty for another week and another month and hundreds of days in Gaza. And they are being paid a lot, as we discussed in our first conversation. But some of them are not paid a lot because they're regular soldiers, not reservists. Some of them are paid a lot, but they have nothing to do with this money anymore because they're in the military all the time, and they're afraid for their lives. And there is a growing sentiment among these soldiers who say, if the ultra-Orthodox don't join and also get drafted to the military, we will refuse. So it's out of a feeling of unfairness. It's not out of care for Palestinian lives or something. And this feeling of unfairness is weakening the military morale, and the army will only continue to function as long as the government is able to bribe the soldiers to put aside their strong feeling of unfairness. And once they are no longer able to bribe the soldiers, then it does fall apart.
That was actually my next question on how does all of this affect the military itself, and my final question, because I know that we're hitting the limits here. How does this affect the military, the Israeli military, and the question of conscription? Because it is not only a generic problem to think about, given what you shared, but at this very time, and we discussed this in the first episode or the first part, that there is an issue with conscription and people leaving or people not wanting to join or what have you. So How does this affect those things?
The Israeli army is already split into two parts. This is something that became very clear in 2016 when a sergeant, El Zaria, murdered Abdel Fattah al-Sharif in Hebron in front of a camera of B'Tselem. This was published. And then, like many Israeli soldiers who feel like they're entitled to kill any Palestinian they want, but in this case, it was in front of a camera. So charges were pressed against him. And he said, I don't want to defend myself using the usual excuse, which is that I felt threatened for my life. He said, it's my right to kill Palestinians if I want to. I am a Jewish soldier. My job is to kill Palestinians. And if I want to kill them, I will kill them. And this caused a break in the military because the discipline started to fall apart. And the Minister of Defense, who said this is not acceptable, soldiers have to follow orders, this Minister of Defense was fired soon afterwards.
It's not acceptable because
not because he killed the Palestinian.
Follow orders, not
yes.
because of what he said regarding the rights.
We are talking about a state that occupies Palestinians, that exercises apartheid as part of a settler colonial system. Of course, there is no respect for Palestinian rights and human life, but it's still not genocide. There is a difference between genocide and occupation. Because the whole point of the Ministry of Defense was we need a sustainable system of domination whereby the soldiers obey orders. If the soldiers just go around and kill everyone they want, which is a precondition for genocide really, then the system of domination will fall apart. This is Moshe Ya'alon, the former Minister of Defense, who was fired basically after saying this. Netanyahu said, I like this populism. I like the soldier who is the king. He called his parents. He referred to El Zaria as the child of us all. And this sort of language created a new kind of agreement between the soldiers and the government. Instead of soldiers who serve the nation, it's soldiers who receive payment for their military service in the form of privilege. This is how society breaks down into tribes. And so the Israeli military broke into two parts. One part is the so-called upper privilege army, the intelligence officers, the Air Force, the drone operators, the doctors. They are mostly Ashkenazi, mostly consider themselves secular, mostly from this kind of liberal Zionist part of the political camp, mostly middle class and higher. They are the ones who have access to advanced technology. Without them, the Israeli military is just an angry mob. The other part of the army is the angry mob, which are the infantry, the artillery, the armored divisions. They are soldiers drawn mostly from Mizrahi Jews, from lower socioeconomic levels, from people with less education, and people who are usually more religious, identify themselves as more religious and more right-wing. And when the army is split so clearly, it creates a deep weakness, which we saw so clearly in the pogrom in Hawara in 2023. In this pogrom, settlers attacked the town of Hawara, which was 500 meters from an Israeli checkpoint full of soldiers. Normally, and the people of Hawara know this, normally when they're attacked by the settlers, then behind the settlers, the soldiers will come. And if they try to defend themselves against the settlers, the soldiers will come and kill them. This time, there were no soldiers behind the settlers. So the Palestinians did not try to defend themselves. They tried to run away because they wanted to survive. But the soldiers in the checkpoint 500 meters away didn't know there was a pogrom going on, because the job of the intelligence and the drone operators who know that a pogrom is taking place is to inform the soldiers. But these soldiers are from the other army. These soldiers at the checkpoint are the Mizrahi soldiers, the less educated soldiers. So the intelligence officers said, I won't do my job. I don't want to. And this was a signal, which I think also signaled to the Hamas that the Israeli military split into two parts. They're not working with each other anymore. And this was one of the reasons that Israel was taken by surprise and was not able to organize an effective defense on October 7, because the military itself has started to divide into tribes. And what we saw with the genocide is that, yes, the so-called sophisticated military has completely abandoned its principles and just said, yeah, it's a moment of revenge, it's a moment of national unity, and we will go back to service. But the army didn't return to function as an army. It functions even now as soldiers out of control, without discipline, doing whatever they want. And when there were many cases in the last 2 years in which soldiers just didn't feel like obeying orders, they were not punished. Do you know that there's a standing order in the Israeli military that soldiers are not allowed to bring their phones into Gaza? And if you just look at social media, the hundreds of thousands of videos that soldiers are taking with their phones from Gaza, openly, you can see their face. And of course their officers know who they are. Not one of them was punished. Not one of them was punished for disobeying a direct order. So this is not an army. This is a settler militia. And a settler militia is really a tribal force. It's not a national force. And it doesn't have a strategy, and it doesn't have the ability to achieve strategic goals. So the great Israeli military, the strongest army in the Middle East, as people like to say, has been fighting 2 years in Gaza without achieving any strategic goals, which compare it to the war of '67, in which this Israeli military, through coordination, military discipline, intelligence, was able to fight and expand the territory of the country by 40% in a matter of 6 days.
Thanks, Shir. I'm afraid we might be cancelled because throughout this entire 3 parts, at least today, you only said Hamas once, the word Hamas. So I think we're going to either be cancelled or be accused of anti-Semitism because we did not center everything on Hamas. So, yeah. I have so many questions, and I know that we're out of time. I mean, I would have to go home with you to keep asking you these questions, and I know that you probably won't appreciate that.
No, you're very welcome.
Thank you. But really, there's a lot to discuss, and I guess we will have to leave it for the next 2 parts. The next part is titled, and I put together the title, so I know that you might have a different take, but it's is the Israeli economy on the verge of collapse? Because I don't take it for granted that what people say that it is going to. It's a question. I'm putting it as a question, so we will address that. And I'd like to also address some of the statements that have been made by previous or former Israeli prime ministers like Ehud Olmert and Ehud Barak on the question of war crimes and worse, and how that resonates especially within Israel. We know how it resonates globally. It's kind of almost ignored at some level because it's damning. But at another level, like many of us observe, you were about several years late in terms of describing things in that way, even if we did not have an active, intensive, real-time genocide. But I'd like to ask about these things next time. And until then, take care of yourself, and thank you again for your generosity of time and all your work and analysis.
Thank you, Bassam.
Take care. That's awesome.
How long did we speak now?
We spoke a little more. I don't know. Definitely, maybe 10 minutes more. All right. That was a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I hope you don't get in trouble because you live in Germany.
No, I'm saying these things a lot in Germany, but if you are worried, I mean, you live in a much more dangerous country than I.
No, my joke was on the opposite.
That I didn't talk
That
only about Hamas.
we didn't talk about Hamas much, and
I could do a whole segment with you just about how the Israelis don't say Hamas, they say Hamas, you know?
yeah, well, I was gonna. I mean, I didn't want to, because I don't want to open the door for satire because I could go on for a long time, but the idea is that we didn't talk about Hamas enough, so we're gonna be accused of being, whatever, anti-Semitic or being whatever it is that we are always accused of. Wow. All right. Let me make sure all the files are good. State of the Union is strong. Why is this not showing? All right, there we go.